Hello, close friends. We are back for this episode that is pretty special to me. I have my professor of debate, Grant, who he was my professor in my first college here in the US, and I learned a lot from him. So, Grant, thank you for being here. And we're going to talk about a lot of important, stressful things that are happening today. But I think he has some hope for us that we clearly need. So, Grant, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to us discussing all those things. And I don't know how much hope I bring. I think hope was a message in the last election, but we'll see.
Thank you. Well, I just want to know, first of all, like your perspective about everything that's going on, and also how do you see us, my generation, and just, I guess, Americans in general, um, dealing and internalizing what's going on. And you can go from there.
If this podcast lasts for like 5 hours, I probably will be able to cover what I think. But if keeping it short, right? Like I think what I think about the future is I am hopeful. I think as a teacher, I have to be hopeful because youth gives me the belief that we're not that bad off. And certainly right now we sort of hit a position where politics are definitely crying out towards the negativity of everything. But the reality is, and what I see from the people that I observe, and I compare them to my generation and generation of my parents, and definitely you folks are significantly better than we were, and which means the world is going to be better off in your hands than it ever was in ours. And when it comes to politics itself, specifically, sort of this new theme of authoritarian slash government control and focus on individual leadership of individuals like President Trump or Elon Musk and so forth and so on, that's just passing. It's nothing new. It's just magnified. And because of the magnification, it actually carries the very same effect that crime and fear of crime takes place. Like, for example, everybody's afraid to go out and play today, yet, the world was significantly much more dangerous 40, 50 years ago. Kidnappings are down, crime is down, assaults are down, yet everybody's petrified. And I think that's exactly the same thing happening when it comes to the politics. We don't have to be that frightened.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. So, do you think we are more educated or more ignorant as a generation?
That's a very interesting question. I think we are both. Unfortunately, we're both educated as far as information-wise. In other words, we have the potential to for most amount of knowledge and information, and each and every one of the younger generation has access to information unlike any other generation that I can think of. But the ignorance comes of how we apply that information. And I think that happens to be part of the problem is that even though we are more educated, more knowledgeable, there's more students in colleges and so forth and so on, even though that statistic has been dropping the last couple of years post-COVID, I think the real problem isn't that we are not knowledgeable. It's rather we willfully choose to ignore some things that are screaming in our faces.
Ignorance is bliss.
Not always, because right now it's going to be very painful, and it is very painful for the younger generation because people believed ignorance is bliss and they decided to trust into a system. America is an interesting ecosystem in it of itself. It has checks and balances, but those checks and balances need to work. Once we become ignorant of how the system functions and we withdraw ourselves from it, it becomes easier for those who are in control of those systems to push it in a direction they want. So by absconding our responsibility of being active and involved, we made the bad things happen.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I asked this question on a poll on social media, and 64% thought we were more ignorant, and just 36% thought we were more educated, which I believe we're more educated. But exactly, it's like we are saturated, or we just don't know what to do with that information. So I think that both are true. I want to ask you about because another question that I asked was if the real change comes from the citizens or if it comes from the government. And majority answer the citizens, right? 92%, because we just don't trust our leaders. But I've been thinking if true progress actually happens just when, the leaders kind of help us out, because we come from kind of like a period where it just felt like we were getting things a little just ethically better. But then as soon as leaders start, coming back with like very fascist, totalitarian, hateful ideas, then you also see a rise in the citizens of also being hateful and also kind of going back to these very established and concerning, and extremist beliefs. So it's like, did that even they were just hiding, like people that thought that were just hiding, and now that it's allowed, is there gonna be a rise, or is this just like propaganda? Like, what's happening? Like, do you really think that we can kind of go back to that kind of herd
Let's
mentality?
not make America great again. I think I have a problem with that. Like assumptive position that somehow we're going to go back to a place when things made sense. I don't know much, but I do know this: things never made sense. Things were always bad. We don't have to focus on our bad. All we need to focus about the conditions of people, and specifically when we're talking about immigrants within the United States, and we're saying things are bad now. Things aren't as bad now as they were. All we need to do is to talk about how American politics treated the immigrants prior to that, and whether we go back 20 years, whether we go back 40 years, whether we go back to Zoot Suit riots, or we go to Chinese Exclusionary Act, I think immigrants have always gotten a short end of the stick. Today, at least, we're talking about protecting those individuals, or at least being appalled by the reality that people probably should not be beaten, should not be thrown, should not be summarily deported, and youth is the one who's being active and vocal and is willing to step out there, and maybe it's sometimes not as effective as we would like, and they're willing to march on the streets and raise their fists up, but that was not happening when we normalized beating of immigrants on the streets or mass deporting them. And those things, luckily, are in the past. So I think things aren't as hopeful or hopeless. And I definitely think there needs to be some kind of coming together between people and the leaders. As long as we separate ourselves from our leaders and we think of them as entity separate than us, we're always going to have this repetitious problem, or because if the leaders think that they are separate from the people, which definitely they are, because anybody who could logically say that a billionaire who is born on I don't know, if we're running a marathon, I'll use that example. Let's say you're supposed to run a marathon and Trump is supposed to run a marathon with you. I'm not going to make jokes about physical abilities and so forth and so on. A majority of those individuals that are currently controlling us, specifically our glorious leaders, they were born on the 25th mile of the marathon. Rest of us have to keep up, which means their understanding of the world is always going to be biased, and they're not going to ever represent us or our needs. What they need is not what we need. So sooner or later, we're going to actually have to realize that. And once we have that, synchronicity between the people and the leaders, we'll be able to better ourselves and be better off. But that's not going to happen as long as we think leaders are obligated to do something, and it's never going to happen that leaders expect us to follow. And I think essentially that's the problem.
But are those like very extreme mentalities coming back?
No, they're not. They're
Like,
just
it's
being
not gonna
vocalized. No, I promise
Or they never
you.
left?
No,
or
they
what?
never left. Look. Here's the reality, right? Like, let's say we're talking about specifically one of the big issues that immigration, right? Our fear of how horrific our language is, and definitely the fear tactics that are being utilized right now, that's all they are. They're literally fear tactics. Like, for example, the ICE, as in their position of stopping immigrants and checking for their documentation and so forth and so on, these policies that specifically the most recent one, the executive order that seemed to give a permission for the ICE officers to go into the places of worship and churches and so forth and so on, and schools, that's not new. new. That was in the past. And all this does is just simply allows or brings to the forefront the very same tactics that were utilized in the past. But before, it was not publicized. When President Barack Obama deported close to 2.4 million people during his 8-year administration, there was no outcry. Somehow nobody went out there. Nobody said, wait a second, something's wrong here. So many people cannot be criminal. How do we know this? Is because we know factually that people, specifically undocumented people, tend to be the most law-abiding people ever. Why? Because they're afraid to break the laws. They're afraid of the deportation. But somehow Obama was able to find 2.4 million people and deport them. And yet Democrats continued claiming that they're a party of immigrants. There's something's wrong there. Then, during the first Trump administration, the incident with cages happened, everybody very quickly forgot the reality that those cages were built, or at least ordered to be built, under the orders of the same President Barack Obama's administration. That's also problematic, and we forgot that. And that reality is that executing it and publicizing it is what creates this fear and paranoia that most people have. And that's why they're being done, is because it's a different way of achieving the same goal. You deport people quietly, hush hush, or you deport people loudly with cameras, and you're hoping to achieve the same result, which is to keep your undocumented population under control, an immigrant population in fear. And so this is nothing new. It's not even original. It's a repetition, not even a variation on a theme. It's just something that is being done with the tool of with the modernity and advertisement in order to make people be more afraid.
Yeah, you threw some numbers the other day that if the deportations keep the same at this rate, Trump will deport 1/5 of what Barack Obama deported, right?
As of right now, by the very latest, because this is public information, less than 5,500 people have been deported as of right now. If we were to say this was a month work project, which means by the end of the year, the most amount of people that would be deported would be about 7,000. Or 70,000. If we were to multiply that by 4 years, that's 140, 280,000. 280,000 compared to 2.4 million. I do not know whether it's possible to increase that numbers, or maybe it will, or maybe it won't. But if the things continue as they are right now, the numbers themselves will not have as many people deported under this administration than it was in the past. But today, more so than in any other time, we are frightened.
Yeah, it's the tool of fear that it's being used, and it's the language, the language, how it's being done. Have you seen the memes that the White House has put out? Have you seen those or no? Like ASMR deporting illegal, and it's literally like a TikTok video.
I'm going to be honest, memes, somehow I miss the meme concept.
Oh my gosh, Grant, you're not gonna believe this. So this comes from the original White House Instagram account. Okay, the first one that I was like, okay, this is not real. Like, this is a joke. Like, this is a fake account that someone did that is trying to make the government look bad. But no, it did came from the official White House account, and it's this one. On Valentine's Day.
Roses are red, violets are blue. Come here illegally, and we will deport you.
That's like that's something that was posted from the White House account, and then look at this one, which is crazy. Do you know what? I don't know how to pronounce it, but ASMR is like this style of videos that they do that it sounds.
Yeah. Some people like find that to be like crinkling paper and like deep breathing. Yeah, I've heard.
So stuff. That's like that style of video, and look what the White House posted.
Yeah.
ASMR, illegal alien deportation. So for me, it's like, look, we can sit here and talk about all the executive orders and why are they right, why are they wrong, if we need to close the border or not. But for me, it's like, regardless of if this has been done before, why are we using this tone that it's like so just cruel, like cruel, divisive, it's in your face, it's literally being joked about, you know? And it's like, why do we have that need? If you're just this great leader that wants to solve these problems, like, why do you have to just hurt every time you open your mouth?
Effectiveness. You have to remember that what language contains within itself is power. Language actually has four things that goes for it continuously. Language by nature is symbolic. Symbolicism appeals to a group of people, and it allows for us to sidestep the meaning behind it. I am for strong borders. All of a sudden the sound of the chain resonates with somebody who says, okay, well, the strength comes around, right? And the funny thing is, it has the opposite effect on those who are afraid of it. So somebody who has been to or visited prisons in their youth, for me, the sound of the chain, sound of the locking, grating, sound of the gates closing is a petrifying sound, and I am afraid of it, which means to me that doesn't re-entrenches anything other than the fear. And that's exactly what they're shooting for, because they're using the symbolism of the language to be able to end the way they demonstratively are utilizing the modern technology and so forth and so on. That just reinforces their message. And by reinforcing their message, they're achieving two things at the same time. Those who would be frightened are now truly frightened, and those who are their supporters are emboldened. They're emboldened because they feel like something is being done, because how can they say something's not being done? See, the chain is being dragged across. A similar thing could be said when the Trump wall was being built, and it never got finished and never got built and never. But it was definitely a very symbolic message. And this time around, certainly, they are doubling down on the propaganda aspect of it, because it increases their effectiveness.
What did you posted yesterday that it was about propaganda?
Oh,
it's more effective with people that believe that they're free.
Yeah, because if you think you're doing something of your own volition, then you are no longer concerned about the fact that you're being controlled, and that's when propaganda is most effective. Realistically speaking, this applies not to just this political reality, but every political reality. When we make people believe in the Kool-Aid that they're drinking, it's so much easier for them to swallow. And I think that's inherently one good thing that we could grasp from any of this, is that this is not new, and this is all have a temporary shelf life. People aren't that stupid, people aren't that bad, and people are going to come to a realization. Unfortunately, that realization might be slower than we would hope, but it's there. At one point, when enough children are hurt, enough people are turned away, enough people have lost their jobs, people are going to say, no, this ain't working. And I can tell you the most glaring example of how and why history has demonstrated that we're capable of making the right decision, maybe too late, was when the original Roe v. Wade was passed. It was not passed as today. Our world isn't more religious than it was in 1970s and so forth and so on. None of those things are true. But one thing was true: when children and women began dying because of the back alley abortions, we as a nation realized that this ought not happen. And this is not me advocating for or against. I definitively believe that this particular issue is for each person to determine, etc. and etc. But I do believe that we realized that doesn't matter where you stand, women and children probably should not be dying on the streets. And we need to probably do something in order to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Why is the U.S. not that vocal about human trafficking and child trafficking? Because, I think about the top issues, and I just don't understand the urgency of just making too generous. I get it, we don't need to have 57 generous, but is that urgent, right? I don't think it's urgent. It's not hurting me, it's not hurting anyone. But other things like child trafficking, which is so wild, so many kids come from Latin countries, which we will talk more about this because it's mind-blowing, and I'm kind of scared of what the cartels are gonna do once they are out of jobs, because I don't think they're just gonna go ask for a job at a bank, right?
Oh, are you saying criminal organization will not find another way to earn money?
Exactly,
Yeah, they will.
but we'll go there. But I'm just curious, like, why do you think the U.S. is not prioritizing child trafficking and mass shootings? Because that's very confusing to me to see how it's such a big issue in this country, yet I don't hear enough about it.
Um, I can say about child trafficking more so than I can say about mass shooting. Mass shooting as an epidemic is a rather new concept, and not to say the idea that we are somehow entitled or capable or willing to take strangers' lives as some sort of a way to pay for our sins is literally a modern phenomenon. And in many ways is horrific. But as far as the child trafficking is because America has a very weird concept of who needs to be protected and how should we protect it. And this is not a criticism of the country itself, but rather specifically on how we view issues. The best example I can tell you is probably going to sound a little problematic, and I apologize even before saying it. There was this director by the name of Roman Polanski who recently received, well, not recently, everything is recent when you're my age, about a decade ago, he got a Oscar, and the entirety of the Oscars stood up and applauded him loudly for receiving a Oscar for his movie. Now, if you happen not to know who Roman Polanski is, he was a director, very famous in Hollywood. And in the 1970s, he raped a 13-year-old kid. And he was supposed to be prosecuted. He didn't want to pay or do the time in the United States. He escaped to France and continued his movie making, etc., and etc., and etc. When asked upon how is it possible that one could have that kind of relationship with a 13-year-old? His response was, she liked it, and I thought she was older, and in other words, all the other stuff. Now, all of this happened a couple of years before Me Too movement was starting. But the reality is that every single person at that Oscars knew and was aware of what Roman Polanski had done, and yet every single one of them stood and gave him a standing ovation. So I don't know how to answer to your question, why do we allow bad things to happen? But I think if we were to stop doing this, we'd probably value that 13-year-old kid's life a little bit more than artistic integrity of Roman Polanski.
Yeah. Pop culture is just, I don't know which one I trust more. Because, like, politics and pop culture, at least pop culture, I feel like it's less... I don't know, we expect less somehow from these people than from politicians, which I don't think it's right, for sure. I feel like we have these leaders also that we're not really demanding any moral, standards for artists.
Well, let's look at who our leaders are in pop culture, and I think maybe that's where the problem begins. And this is, I don't want to, drop numbers here, but what is it? 8 out of every 10 kids want to be a social influencer. When asked what does that mean, they don't know what the response, how, in what genre, or in what capacity. They're crickets. They don't know, but all they want is the popularity, money, fame, etc., and etc., and etc. Never in our time have we ever wanted that kind of never humanity ever agreed on one job. There was never this. Everybody wants to be a firefighter, maybe like a superhero of some kind, but not. So pop culture is so influential. It literally is able to shape and mold what people think. I mean, you have youth that literally is advertised in context of your success is dependent on having a supercharged, $200,000, $300,000 car in your garage. And if you're 20-year-old and you don't have it, you're a loser. And everybody points fingers and says, you're a loser, which comes to pop culture isn't necessarily, and not to say that pop culture is bad now, because if we go into the music genres of 1960s and 1970s and look at the lyrics and what they were preaching, we would say that they were definitely rather problematic, even in the manner in which they were writing their songs, and it was completely normalized and accepted. So should we expect more from each other than we should expect from the politicians? I have a like, I don't know, silly response to that. I think we shouldn't expect nothing from each other, and we should expect everything from our elected officials, because they're supposed to be in service to us, not to them. Whereas I cannot control, as you cannot control what I'm about to say, I cannot control what you're about to say. That's where the problem happens on a political level, when they start saying you should say this and you shouldn't say this. The only people we should ask and demand stuff from is definitely our politicians.
Interesting. Interesting. I hadn't looked at it like that. I like it. I like it. Okay, so we're gonna cut it here for the first part. And we'll see you second part, where we will keep discussing about, this politics, Elon Musk, the trend of America to name lakes, oceans, and anything that comes to their way. So go to part 2. Okay, we're barely like halfway. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.